Today, we're talking about ice. That's right, frozen water. The thing you used to put in your drinks without a second thought, back when refrigerators existed, and your biggest concern was whether the ice maker was making that weird noise again. Check out our merch. Use the discount code YouTube, link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. Here's the thing about the post-apocalypse. Water becomes complicated real fast. Rivers, probably contaminated with whatever industrial nightmare leaked into them when nobody was left to maintain the facilities. Lakes, could be fine, could be a chemical soup. Puddles, let's not even discuss puddles. You know what those puddles have seen? But ice is different. Ice is water that said, I'm going to take a nap for a while before everything went sideways. Depending on when and where it froze, ice can be one of your cleanest water sources available. It's also portable, doesn't slosh around in your pack, and won't spill all over your last pair of dry socks. The catch? You have to know what you're doing, because not all ice is created equal, and melting it wrong means you'll end up with less water than you started with, which is a special kind of frustrating that only the apocalypse can provide. So grab whatever you're using as a notebook these days. Napkin, wall, your own memory if you're feeling confident, and let's talk about turning frozen stuff into drinkable stuff. First things first, you need to learn to read ice like it's telling you its life story. Because it kind of is. Good ice, the kind you want, is clear or white, relatively odorless, and comes from sources that were clean before freezing. Think icicles formed from clean precipitation, ice sheets on bodies of water that weren't downstream from a chemical plant, or frost accumulation in areas away from roads and industrial zones. Clear ice generally means it froze slowly, which allowed air bubbles and impurities to escape. White or cloudy ice froze faster and trapped more air, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's contaminated. It just means it was in a hurry. Now, let's talk about bad ice. If ice has a color that isn't white, clear, or slightly blue, walk away. Yellow ice, obviously skip that one. Green ice, that's algae. And while algae won't necessarily kill you, it's also not what we're going for here. Brown ice, that's sediment at best, something worse at worst. Pink or red ice, that's either mineral deposits or bacteria, and you don't want to play that guessing game. Smell is your next tool. Clean ice shouldn't smell like much of anything. Maybe a faint mineral scent, if it's from a natural source. If it smells like chemicals, fuel, sulfur, or anything that makes your nose say, "Excuse me, what?" Leave it alone. That smell doesn't go away when it melts. It just becomes smelly water, and you deserve better. Location matters too. Ice near roads might contain salt, oil residue, or antifreeze. Ice near industrial areas could have absorbed airborne pollutants before or during freezing. Ice in cities is suspect until proven otherwise because Urban Runoff is a greatest hits album of things you don't want to drink. Your safest bets are ice from elevated areas away from human infrastructure, icicles formed from precipitation on clean surfaces, and ice from bodies of water you have reason to believe were clean. When in doubt, gather it anyway and purify aggressively. We'll get to that part later. Alright, let's talk about actually getting the ice. Think of this as a tour through the different varieties of apocalypse ice, each with its own personality and collection challenges. First up, icicles. These are the low-hanging fruit of ice collection, sometimes literally hanging. Icicles form from dripping water that freezes mid-drip, which means they're often pretty clean if they formed from precipitation or snow. The trick is breaking them off without shattering them into a million pieces. You'll spend 20 minutes picking out of the snow. A firm grip and a confident snap usually does it. If you're too aggressive, congratulations, you now have ice shrapnel. If you're too gentle, you're just standing there holding an icicle, like you're waiting for someone to take your picture. Next, surface ice, also known as nature's dinner plate. This is the thin layer that forms on puddles, buckets, troughs, or any standing water when temperatures drop. It's usually pretty thin and breaks easily, which makes it great for quick collection, but terrible for long-term storage. Slide a flat tool underneath it, lift gently, and try not to splash the water beneath it all over yourself. The water underneath is probably dirtier than the ice on top, so keep them separate. Then there's sheet ice from larger bodies of water. This is the serious stuff, thicker, more substantial, and requiring actual tools to harvest. You'll need something to score or crack the surface, whether that's an axe, a heavy rock, or whatever blunt instrument the apocalypse has provided you with. Work in sections cut manageable chunks. And remember that falling through ice into freezing water is an extremely effective way to exit this tutorial early. Test thickness before you trust it with your body weight. 4 inches for walking, at minimum. If you can't verify thickness, stay near the shore and reach. Frost accumulation is the sneaky option. It's the thin layer of ice crystals that forms on surfaces during cold nights. Metal, glass, tarps, whatever you've got, it's thin, spread out, and annoying to collect. But it adds up. Scraping frost into a container feels tedious until you realize you've gathered a cup of water while everyone else was still figuring out their plan. Think of it as the loose change of water collection. Seems insignificant until it isn't. Snow is technically ice, so we'll mention it here too. Pack it tight when you collect it, because loose snow is mostly air. That big pile of snow you gathered, it's going to melt down into a disappointingly small amount of water. It's not a scam, it's just physics, but it still feels like a scam every single time. Now let's talk infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean whatever junk you can find and repurpose into something useful. Metal trays are your best friend. Cookie sheets, baking pans, car hoods if you're feeling ambitious, anything with a flat surface and some kind of lip to keep water from escaping. Position them at a slight angle so meltwater runs toward a collection point. Congratulations, you've just built a water collection system that a medieval peasant would be very impressed by. Scrap metal sheets work similarly, though they require more creativity to channel the water where you want it. Bend the edges up to create a trough, or position them to drain into a container. Yes, you're basically building a gutter system out of garbage. Welcome to post-apocalyptic plumbing. For condensation collection, which is relevant when you're dealing with ice in enclosed or semi-enclosed or semi-enclosed. Spaces stretched plastic over a frame works beautifully. The water vapor condenses on the plastic, runs down to the lowest point, and drips into whatever you've placed underneath. This is more useful for humid conditions than pure ice collection. But when you're melting ice inside a shelter, you'd be surprised how much moisture ends up in the air. Might as well catch it. Fabric and cloth can act as collection wicks. Drape a strip of absorbent material so one end is in contact with melting ice and the other hangs over your collection container. Capillary action will slowly move the water along the fabric. It's not fast, it's not efficient, but it's passive, which means you can do other things while physics does the work. Bottles, jars, cans, and basically any container you can find become essential. Clean them as best you can before use. Even a container that looks clean might have residue from whatever was in it before. A quick rinse, using water you're not planning to drink, helps ensure your collected water doesn't taste like the ghost of whatever previously lived in that jar. The goal here is to create a system, not just a one-time collection. Set up your trays, position your collectors, establish your containers, and let the whole apparatus work for you over time. Think of it as building the world's saddest Rube Goldberg machine, except instead of a pointless chain reaction, you get water, which makes it significantly less pointless. Okay, you've got ice. Now you need to turn it into something you can actually drink. And here's where people mess up, because melting ice seems simple until you do it wrong and lose half your water to evaporation or spillage. Let's start with the lowest energy option, body heat. This sounds uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable, putting ice in a container and keeping that container against your body, under your arm. Against your stomach, inside your clothing will slowly melt it using nothing but your own warmth. The trade-off is that you're now cold. Your body is working to heat the ice, which means you're burning calories and lowering your core temperature. Use this method in emergencies, or when you literally have no other option. It's not efficient, but it works when nothing else does. Solar melting is the patient person's approach. Spread ice on a dark surface, black metal, dark fabric, anything that absorbs sunlight, and let the sun do its thing. Dark surfaces get warmer than light surfaces because they absorb more energy instead of reflecting it. This is basic physics that the apocalypse hasn't changed. Angle your surface toward the sun, protect it from wind as much as possible, and make sure the meltwater has somewhere to go. Check on it periodically, reposition as the sun moves, and resist the urge to watch it like a pot that won't boil. Fire-heated metal is faster but requires more attention. Heat a piece of metal over your fire, not directly in the flames, if you can avoid it, because direct flame wastes fuel and creates temperature spikes. Then place your ice on the heated metal and watch it melt. The trick is temperature control. You want warm, not hot. We'll talk about what happens when you get this wrong in a moment. The covered pot method works well if you have a pot with a lid. Put ice in the pot. Put the pot near, not on, your heat source, cover it, and let the trapped warmth slowly melt everything. The lid prevents evaporation and keeps heat from escaping too quickly. This is the controlled, sensible approach, which means it's also the boring approach, but boring is good when water is involved. Dark container in sunlight is a set-to-tan-forget-it method. Fill a dark container with ice, seal it or cover it, and leave it in direct sunlight. The container absorbs heat, the ice melts, the water stays in the container. Come back later to water. It won't win any speed records, but it requires almost no effort once you've set it up. And now, let's discuss what happens when your melting operation goes sideways, because it will, probably more than once. The overheated metal tray is a classic mistake. You get impatient, you crank up the heat, you put your ice on metal that's way too hot, and instead of melting, your ice immediately begins to steam and evaporate. You're not making water, you're making a tiny, inefficient humidifier. The ice shrinks, the water vapor disappears into the air, and you're left wondering where your water went. The answer is into the atmosphere, where you can't drink it. Slow and steady wins this particular race. The tipping tray disaster happens when you've set up your angled collection system and something bumps it, or you bump it, or a gust of wind shows up at exactly the wrong moment. Suddenly, your carefully positioned tray is no longer positioned. Your meltwater is running off in the wrong direction, and you're scrambling to save what you can while the rest soaks into the ground or your shoes. Secure your equipment, weight it down. Assume the universe is looking for opportunities to knock things over. The container overflow is a slow-motion tragedy. You set up a container to catch drips, you walk away feeling productive, and you come back to find the container overflowed an hour ago and half your water is now a puddle next to the container instead of inside it. The lesson here is to either use a bigger container or check on things more often. Physics doesn't pause just because you're not watching. The ice in your lap incident occurs when you're using the body heat method and your container isn't as sealed as you thought. You've essentially created a slow leak directly onto yourself. Now you're wet and cold, which is exactly the opposite of what you wanted. Waterproof your setup, or at least wrap it in something that can contain the leaks. And finally, the I thought the container was clean moment. You melt your ice, you pour your water, you take a drink, and you realize that container definitely used to hold something else. Something that has now flavored your water. Depending on what that something was, this ranges from unpleasant to genuinely concerning. Clean your containers, folks, then clean them again. Here's the part people forget. Melting ice does not purify it. If there were bacteria, viruses, parasites, or contaminants in that ice, they're still in your water. They're just warmer now and floating around more freely. Freezing does slow down or kill some pathogens. Cold temperatures make it harder for bacteria to reproduce, and some organisms don't survive the freezing process. But some is not all, and slower is not stopped. You cannot rely on freezing to have sterilized your water source. Assume anything you melt still needs to be purified. Boiling is your most reliable option. Bring that water to a rolling boil and keep it there for at least 1 minute. At higher elevations, where water boils at lower temperatures, extend that to 3 minutes. This kills bacteria, viruses, and parasites. It doesn't remove chemical contaminants, but it handles the biological stuff effectively. Filtration helps with particulates and some biological threats. If you've got a commercial filter, use it. If you're improvising, layers of fabric, sand, and charcoal can remove larger particles and improve taste. This is not the same as sterilization, but it's a good preliminary step before boiling. Chemical treatment works if you have the supplies. Water purification tablets, iodine, chlorine dioxide, these are all effective against biological contaminants when used correctly. Follow the dosage instructions if you have them, and remember that chemical treatment takes time to work. You can't drop a tablet in and immediately drink. Give it 30 minutes minimum, longer if the water is cold. UV treatment from sunlight is called SODIS solar disinfection. Fill clear plastic bottles with water, remove any bubbles you can, and leave them in direct sunlight for at least 6 hours or 2 days if it's cloudy. UV radiation damages pathogens and renders them unable to reproduce. This works but it's slow and requires clear containers and direct sun exposure. The short version: melt your ice, then treat it like any other questionable water source. The melting is just step one. So there you have it. Ice collection, identification, melting, and purification, everything you need to turn frozen water into drinkable water in a world where the convenience of running taps is a distant memory. Remember the fundamentals. Check your ice before you collect it. Color, smell, source, location. These all matter. Collect efficiently using whatever materials you can scavenge, because post-apocalyptic water infrastructure is just fancy talk for stuff you found. Melt slowly and carefully to avoid losing water to evaporation or spills. And always, always purify before you drink, because melted doesn't mean clean. Ice is just frozen hope. Melt it carefully. Stay hydrated, stay skeptical of yellow ice, and stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll be discussing which roadside plants are edible and which ones will make you deeply regret your foraging decisions. Until then, this has been Well, Society Collapsed. Now what? Reminding you that survival is just problem solving with higher stakes.